From the PEP Radio Newsroom, this is the Hourly News Blast. Advocate is reporting the log cabin Republicans officially abandoned the transgender community, pulling the ladder of progress and support that benefited its members up behind themselves. Ross Hemminger, president of the nation's most prominent gay Republican organization, announced that log cabin had reversed a decision from 2015 to include transgender rights in its mission statement. In an op-ed published by Townhall, he wrote that the board of directors had voted to instead concentrate specifically on issues of sexual orientation and conservative values. In other words, we are an LGB advocacy organization as our founders envisioned and as our moral center calls us to be. I hope they realize that there are plenty of Christians out there that don't really care for log cabin Republicans, but I digress. The group's website now identifies it as America's oldest and largest organization for LGB conservatives and our straight allies. Those aren't allies, you know. Hemminger wrote in the op-ed that the issues now dominating conversations about trans rights, particularly regarding trans youth, prompted the change. While the group said a decade ago that all adults should be free to pursue the happiness, free of government interference, extending that principle to transgender young people is apparently no longer a priority. The transgender movement has ceased focusing on adults at all. Nearly all of their efforts and those of their aligned special interest groups focus on minors. Hemminger wrote, they push schools to teach radical gender ideology. They want biological men and women's sports regardless of the consequences. Perhaps most offensively, they support gender reassignment treatments for minors, often without the knowledge or consent of the parents, knowing full well these treatments are mostly irreversible. That is not how any of that works. But again, digress here. While the recent board vote codifies the disregard for trans rights, the organization had already shifted over time towards supporting President Donald Trump, even as he increasingly targeted transgender people. In 2016, the organization withheld an endorsement of Trump because of uncertainty about how he would treat LGBT Americans. But a few years later, after Trump had instituted a ban on transgender service members and moved to allow government contractors to discriminate based on sexual orientation and gender identity, the group in 2019 relented and endorsed Trump's re-election effort. In other words, they bent the knee. Kind of like Republicans do at large conventions when Grindr's still up. I digress again. An endorsement the Republican president ultimately embraced. Trump lost that election. 4 years later, however, the group cut a six-figure check to Melania Trump to speak at a fundraiser for the group as her husband made his comeback run for the White House. Even as Trump's rhetoric increasingly targeted transgender Americans, including adults, the organization defended the Republican leader because the organization completely lacks any sense of spine, backbone. Hemminger said that dropping transgender issues from the group's mission statement came only after significant conversation. He also stressed that memberships in the organization remain open to trans members. Membership remains open to all conservatives. We welcome all our allies in this mission, and as participants in our organization, he said, our chapters will continue to welcome all allies and will operate in ways that best serve their membership. This is the equivalent, you know what, let's move on. But he said that further embracing transgender rights while debates over transgender women's participation in women's sports and gender-affirming care for minors continue, ultimately threatened hard-earned conservative support for issues like marriage equality. We have fought for the right to legally marry who we love. No, you didn't. You weren't out on the front lines back in 2013 when we were fighting here in Pennsylvania. You were nowhere to be found. You were probably down at the corner bar. Fight for rights to serve our country and our communities openly and proudly and to enjoy the same inalienable rights afforded to all law-abiding Americans, and we succeeded. However, the new era of gender identity politics is not the movement we supported and fought for. Gay men and women are losing public support across the country and support for gay marriage and other once widely accepted rights is eroding. Are eroding. And yes, they are, largely because of spineless morons like you guys. Why? Because many voters weren't alive or cognizant of the politics of gay marriage winding its way through the courts and gaining ground in public opinion. Their view of the gay community is based on today's radical transgender activists with their unnecessary and discomfiting focus on America's youth. You know what? That's the news blast for this hour. I can't take any more of this log cabin Republican bullshit. Call it what it is. The Pennsylvania Equality Project Housing Survey is now open to all LGBTQ+, even the idiot Republicans and other marginalized respondents nationwide from now through December 31st. Details are on the survey page at paequality.com. PEP Radio is available on the Live 365 app, the homepage at paequality.com, Roku, Alexa, and wherever you find streaming radio. Up next, we have the Meadville area weather forecast here on PEP Radio.